Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you, first off, for joining us in what should be a very informative and lively discussion. I am Dennis Carroll. I will moderate this session this morning. Before we begin, I would first off just like to offer up a couple of housekeeping issues. First, for those that are viewing, we would welcome your questions and answers. If you go to the bottom of the Zoom picture, please enter your Q&As and we will try and incorporate those into the discussion that follows. And at the end of this presentation, we will also ask you to take an evaluation that will be offered to you electronically. It will help the Prince Mayadol Awards Conference Secretariat refine and improve future discussions as well. So your insight and thoughtfulness would be greatly appreciated. That said, let me just sort of introduce what we will be talking about today. I will start the discussion by exploring what are the megatrends that are likely to dominate the 21st century and talk about what their implications might be for global health. At the end of my presentation, our extremely distinguished panel will then be invited to offer their reflections and thoughts on these megatrends in the context of trying to achieve the world we want, a world that is healthy, resilient, fair, equitable, and how we can use that forward-leaning insight into how these megatrends may impact to be able to maximize the positive consequences of some of these megatrends and really mitigate the worst of these possible consequences. So with that, I will like to open this up by sharing a presentation with you. And as we've said, this is the discussion about the world we want. Prince Mayadol's 2022 theme this year is about how can we achieve the kind of healthy world that we need. This discussion, however, will be about 6 megatrends and their potential implication for global health in the 21st century. And again, it's a question of how can we use that forward-leaning insight to exploit and take advantage of our understanding of what is ahead of us and how we might be able to achieve the world we want. So it's important to understand that achieving the world we want requires understanding the world we are likely to inherit. And this is the world of the 21st century. What are these future trends? What are their likely consequences? And ultimately, what are their implications for global health? What I would like to do is to talk about 6 megatrends. These are not the only dynamics and trends that will play themselves out in the 21st century, but I've picked these 6 because of their potential implications for global health. First off, population and population change. Changing demographics, urbanization, climate change, land use change, and ultimately transformative technologies. So with the first population change, what we have here is a dynamic map that is showing how between 1950 and projected out to the year 2100, how the world's population has changed around the world. And you'll see in the top left-hand corner, a clock ticking away, 2040, 2050, at 10 decade intervals. And it shows that in the 1950s, the last half of the 21st century, we saw extraordinary population growth, largely in Asia. But as we move into the 21st century, we begin seeing a very different dynamic. Asia's population begins to contract. And it's in Africa that we're seeing the largest contribution of future population growth. These are profoundly important when we think about how the future challenges are going to play themselves out, how the changing population dynamics and ultimately the demographic dynamics are going to have to profound global health implications. If we look at this same sort of image in a different way, again, looking at Asia in the second part of the 20th century, exploding in population. But as we move again into the 21st century, the green bar is that of Africa. And so we're looking at complete transition in terms of population dynamics. And that will be important as we think about future challenges and issues. Ultimately, what this means is that by the end of the 21st century, 5 of the top 10 most populous countries, in fact, will be in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. India will be the most populous country, but it's important to note that Nigeria will be the 3rd most populous country with almost 800 million people. And Uganda will have over 200 million people. So these population changes will be profound and important to understand. With those population changes also come demographic changes. And as you look at this fast-moving demographic map, it's clear that as we move across the latter half of the 20th century into the 21st century, one key indicator is the world is getting older. Even as we see a population surge in sub-Saharan Africa, it's also coincident with an aging population. And in Asia, we're looking at, again, with a shrinking population growth, a profound increase in the number of older citizens within that region. Let me look specifically at Uganda and its growing and aging population. We can see a classic pyramid, population pyramid, 2017, where the population of Uganda is about 42 million people. But as we move into the 21st century, that population explodes to over 200 million people. And we can see that with that population change, we're looking at an aging population. The median age currently is about 15 years. But as we get to the end of this century, it's 38 years. And we can see that, in fact, the population over the age of 55 equals the total population of Uganda today in 2021. So we're looking at a tremendous transition in terms of not just the size of the population, but the distribution across age groups. And clearly that's going to signify a different world that we're going to be living in. By comparison, looking at Thailand, we're not looking at a growing population, we're looking at a shrinking and aging population. As you can see in currently, Thailand is plateauing at about 70 million people. But with the contraction in population growth over the course of the century, by the end of the century, we'll be looking at fewer than 50 million people in all of Thailand. That's a profoundly important observation. And the second is, again, this is going to be an aging population, that Thailand will be not only smaller, but it will be older in terms of its population growth. And with that changing demographic, what we're also looking at is a changing disease pattern. We're looking at, over the course of this century, a significant contraction in the number of diseases that are associated with infections, really being outpaced by the rise of non-communicable diseases and environmental issues. And so as we think about the health challenges in the 21st century across the world's population, and particularly if we think about Africa, that we're going to be looking at a profound change in sort of the health profile of the region, making sure our health systems are adapting and evolving consistent with those health challenges is going to be quite extraordinary. And we can see that across the world, we're looking at a dramatic increase in non-communicable diseases or lifestyle diseases, but no more profoundly than low and middle income countries, where we see just between the year 2000 and 2030, a dramatic increase in the percentage of health issues that are associated with non-communicable diseases. So we're already in the midst of a epidemiologic revolution in many parts of the world, and our health systems are going to be challenged to keep up with those. The next megatrend, of course, is urbanization. As we look at the huge population growth that we're seeing in Africa and elsewhere in the world, urbanization is going to be a profoundly impactful dynamic across this century. And again, this is a dynamic map, and in the top left-hand corner, you see a clock ticking, going essentially from the year 2010 to the end of this century. And you can see where the largest mega cities of the world are going to be populated. And this is largely cities with more than 30 million people. And the biggest take-home message of this is that the largest number of megacities will be in sub-Saharan Africa, with virtually none in East Asia or in the Americas. And it's worth noting that Lagos will have a population of almost 90 million people. And going back to Uganda, whose current population is about 42 million, there'll be the equivalent of 42 million people living in Kampala by the end of this century. Those are, again, signaling a profound transition, not just epidemiologic, but in terms of population settlement dynamics, it's going to pose significant challenges. We can see that one of those challenges, of course, is going to be that with urbanization comes the very real challenge of air pollution. And we can look at this graphic here over 2030, 2050, in the year 2100, the contribution of air pollution to premature mortality is going to be dramatically increasing. And we can see in the color coding of these maps that the increases in air pollution related mortality is closely associated with where we're looking at the population and urbanization dynamics changing dramatically, again, across sub-Saharan Africa. Climate change is, of course, the big transition event within the 21st century. And we can think, as we look at the changes in average surface temperature and the projected changes through the year 2100, we see that even as we are failing to meet the Paris targets of 2000 of earlier this year, we're looking at likelihood of a 4 degrees Celsius increase by the end of this century if our climate change policies and practices don't take a greater root. And what we understand is that with climate change, we're looking at really a broad and comprehensive impact on human health. We're looking at severe weather and all of the associated injuries and displacements associated with extreme weather. Again, we're looking at air pollution and all of the associated respiratory disorders, changing vector ecology, and with that, changing dynamics of disease transmission in different parts of the world. We're looking at increased air pollution, as well as water quality impact. Water and food supply are going to be profoundly impacted, raising questions about people's access to essential nutrients and the displacement dynamics that are going to be associated with people in search of water and food. Environmental degradation, and ultimately extreme heat. All of these are part of the consequences of climate change and their potential impact on human health. And with, again, expanding population, expanding urbanization settlements, expanding dynamics within the ecosystems, land use change is going to be one of the most profound dynamic issues within the 21st century. And we can see this historic map dating back to the 1700s, but then going out to the year 2050. We see that in the late part of the 20th century and now projected out to the 21st century, we're looking at a profound impact on how the ecology of the world is being disrupted as we create our settlements and our agricultural footprint expands. And if you look at the bottom atlas, you're seeing that, again, sub-Saharan Africa is going to be the place where the greatest land use change, where forests will be turned into agricultural plots, where urbanization is going to be, again, disrupting ecologic dynamics. All of these land use changes bring with them really significant implications for human health. First, we know that land use change is one of the most significant predictors of what are called hotspots for emerging diseases, where we know that emerging diseases are closely associated with the disruptive effect on ecologies and the interactive dynamics between human populations and wildlife and livestock. We again, in this map here, are looking retrospectively at what that land use change impact was on the 20th century, where population pressures were most profoundly played themselves out in Asia. And we can see where the red and the yellow. Not surprisingly, we are looking at where most of the emergent diseases of the latter part of the 20th century and today in the early part of the 21st century, where we have seen these emerging diseases, including SARS-CoV-2. But as we move further into the 21st century, we can look at that disruptive impact on the ecology of Africa, and we're going to see, as we've seen in the past, a steady increase in new emergent disease threats. And it's clear that where we are seeing the disruptive land use events in sub-Saharan Africa, that is also rich in mammalian populations, which are the primary reservoir of future emerging microbial threats, that the dynamics of new emergent diseases will play themselves out much more profoundly in sub-Saharan Africa than we have seen currently. But land use change isn't simply about new disease emergence. It's also about changes in habitats. And while not directly related to global health, one of the things we understand about the disruptive effect that we are having as a species on the ecosystems around us is really impacting on ecologic health. And nothing is going to be more profound than the species extinction challenges associated with the land use changes that we're looking at. And in fact, we will be looking at a really mass extinction events over the course of the century. Uganda, 18 to 29% of the terrestrial species that currently exist in Uganda will be extinct by the end of this century. And globally, we're looking at almost 10% of the world's almost 6 million terrestrial species threatened with extinction. And one of the things we understand is that this disruptive effect on ecosystems ultimately play themselves out profoundly in terms of our own human health challenges. Species extinction will have significant impact on our own well-being. The last topic is really about transformative technologies. We live in an area we've seen with the information technology revolution, bringing us by way of the internet into a much more closely connected global community, where today over 60% of the world has access to the internet. And we see that the penetration region by region is increasingly dynamic. And ultimately, by the end of the mid-century here, the global growth of the Internet of Things is going to be incredibly disruptive and creating new opportunities of connectivity, where almost 97% of the world will be connected to the Internet of Things. So we are a world that is getting closer, more connected than ever before. We are also at the cusp of the sixth technologic revolution, avian influenza, where machine data and people connectivity will be creating a new era. And we can see that artificial intelligence will really be playing itself out in a number of profound ways. Pattern recognition, our ability to use insights into pattern dynamics to be more predictive and insightful of future threats. Morphologic changes in dynamics, machine learning, creating new analytic and tools to be able to gain greater insight, and autonomous systems where we will be generating new technologies that will be autonomous and robotic. Artificial intelligence also has implications for global health. We can see that it will create opportunities for designer medicines. It will create opportunities for climate change by better use of energy and by better generation of energy. It will create opportunities for more efficient use of our agricultural systems, having opportunities to minimize the impact on biodiversity. We'll be looking at healthy oceans. We'll be looking at opportunities for addressing water scarcity. Again, the ability of using AI to better manage not just our access, but our consumption of water supplies. Clean air, again, better, more efficient generation of energy. And ultimately, the issue about being able to better forecast and anticipate future disasters and using artificial intelligence across a broad spectrum to really create opportunities to better manage the systems we live in and reduce the potential impact that they may have. We can see that this plays itself out in a number of biologic revolutions, again, where we're looking at the confluence of breakthroughs, not just in biologic science, but with the development of computing and automation and AI. We're fueling a new wave of innovation within biomedical research, where we have biomolecules for gene therapy, biosystems that may allow us to culture meat in labs that further reduce our need to have this large agricultural footprint. Biomachine interface that will allow for neuroprosthetics for human or robotic limbs, biocomputing for data computing on DNA strands, and ultimately personalized medicine. Over the course of this century, we'll have enormous opportunities to exploit both artificial intelligence and the biomedical revolutions that are underway. Ultimately, the consequences when we think about the 21st century is that these 5 megatrends will totally transform the world we live in. More of us, particularly in Africa, will be older with new health and lifestyle challenges. We'll be urbanized with elevated air pollution. We'll be hotter with extreme weather, and we'll be living in a world with collapsing habitat loss and mass extinction. But the transformative technologies will bring us closer together in space and thought, and will revolutionize our ability to potentially solve our problems. And it's important that we recognize that Africa will be at the center of many of these new emergent dynamics. Importantly, cutting across all of these megatrends is that it will be happening within the context of shifting geopolitical sands. We have seen under the COVID-19 pandemic, the failure of the global community to act as a coherent, coordinated body has allowed this pandemic to play itself out in ways that continue to threaten us after 2 years. What will the world look like as we go into the 21st century? The 20th century, certainly the second half, was defined by a much more organized and well-ordered bipolar world that brought with it many consequences, but also many benefits. We have seen as we've moved into the 21st century, the fragmentation of the bipolar world and the rise of populism have challenged our ability to think as a global community, much less act as a global community. As we go into the 21st century, understanding these dynamics, these trends, both biologic, ecologic, economic, and political, we have the opportunity to think in a much more forward-leaning way. With that said, can we bring our global health vision to meet these challenges? And that's the question and challenge that I would like to put to our panel and ask each of the panelists to reflect for a moment on how you see the coming century and what are the issues that we can use to our advantage to be able to create a world that in fact achieves the world we want, that is fairer, more equitable, and more resilient. And with that, I'd like to, again, reintroduce our panel and ask them if they would, to take a moment and reflect on the discussions that we just had. And if I could first, again, acknowledge Dr. Gro Brundtland. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion. Dr. Naviv Rao, thank you again for being part of this discussion. And Dr. Yodi, again, our appreciation, and ultimately Dr. Brian Christian and Dr. Mohammed. Each of you will have an opportunity to talk. If I could turn the floor over to you, and starting with Dr. Brundtland, your thoughts and reflections would be greatly welcome.
Dear Dr. Caro, fellow panelists and delegates, it is a pleasure to join you today for this important discussion. Our topic reminds me of a quote attributed to the writer Mark Twain: "Prediction is very difficult, especially about the future." This is particularly true in the field of geopolitics. No one here today can say what the long-term consequences will be of the current tensions over Ukraine or the continuing disputes between the United States and China. But we do know that demographic and climate trends are having and will continue to have a profound impact on global security, health, and development. Certainly, the prediction of a so-called unipolar world, as suggested 30 years ago by Professor Fukuyama in his book, The End of History, did prove inaccurate. But some predictions do come true, including the one by the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, of which I was co-chair, in September of 2019, when we warned that a lethal global pandemic could be imminent. The problem is less that leaders have lacked sufficient information to prevent chaos. Too often, the problem has been a lack of political will to take tough decisions and act for the common good. When international superpowers work together, they can create the conditions for a hopeful future. Examples are the Paris Climate Agreement, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But we can also see what happens when international cooperation falls apart. Consider the inability of the UN Security Council to act with urgency and unity in the face of protracted conflicts and crises from Afghanistan and Myanmar to Syria and Yemen. COVID-19 has exposed the profound inequality that scars our world and poses grave risks to future stability. We have seen remarkable innovation over the past 2 years, particularly in the field of vaccine development. But the inequitable distribution of these life-saving vaccines is hampering a global recovery, which is both morally outrageous and economically myopic. COVID-19 has also highlighted the critical need to confront the threat of disinformation via social media and how our knowledge base is in some cases being actively undermined for malign purposes. This includes the spread of anti-vax conspiracy theories and the deliberate use of so-called fake news to undermine democratic processes and our institutions. These problems can only be addressed at a global level. The Sustainable Development Goals offer a practical pathway to achieving a fairer world, including the commitment to universal health coverage. But we are dangerously short of time to achieve those goals by the deadline of 2030. And all of us have a responsibility to mobilize and to hold our leaders accountable to their commitments. This requires active citizen engagement and respect for the independence of civil society. Only by allowing all parts of our body politic to thrive will we arrive at the world we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brundtland. Just to amend, I neglected to also thank Dr. Carrico um, for participating in today's discussion and picking up on Dr. Brundtland's reference to the extraordinary advances being made in vaccine technology. Dr. Carrico has been at the forefront of that, and really thank her for her leadership. Now I'd like to turn back over to Dr. Rao.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Appreciate this opportunity. I thank the PMAC organizers and Dennis for this opportunity. Thank you. Rockefeller Foundation has been associated with the Prince Mahidol Conference for many, many years, and we're proud to continue to do so. When you introduced this, Dennis, at the pre-session, you said this was all about the world we want. And I saw the logo with the 3 W's. But you also said something, and I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or if you meant it, but you said it's not just the world we want, but the world we need. And I'm going to pick up on that and talk about the world we want, but more important, the world we need. And I want to talk about 3 challenges that I'm seeing in global public health. And that's going to be the focus of my comments. And then what can we do about them? And the 3 challenges that I see is one about equity or inequity. The second is about trust, and Gro has already talked about that. And the third is about partnerships or the lack of. Just let me step into the equity issue. I posit that the class divide of the future will be access to data. Today, the class divide is money. And we know that those who have money, the haves, have better health than those who don't have money, the have-nots. I believe the future class divide will be access to data. And again, those who have access to data will have better health than those who don't have access to data. If that is the case, if that is the challenge, that there is a class divide that is coming up based on access to data, and that will also drive public health, then what are we going to do about it? We need to lay the pipes, we need to lay the rails right now on the data backbones that will address this issue in an equitable manner. It is not enough that the haves continue to lay down platforms and build and realize the benefits of data, whereas those who have not continue to slip further down the road. So the first issue is equity, and I think we need to work together to think about data as in an equitable manner to bridge that gap. Second, Gro has already touched on it, is misinformation and the lack of trust in public institutions. This has really come back to hurt us, and in the future, I believe this will be a bigger challenge, more so as Dennis has shown how connected we are going to be, that this could be both a boon and a danger for us. And the way I believe we need to approach this is to fight like with like. The misinformation is much better organized, is much more on message, is much on very clear in their objectives. Whereas on the other side, we are still dealing with data and messaging that is hard to understand, and expect the population to fight misinformation, which is so easily digestible with data and statistics. And I think we need to understand how to fight misinformation with the same tools, with the same kind of messaging that allows this misinformation today to spread so rapidly. The third is lack of partnership. Right now, we always knew in public health there's a golden triangle, and in the triangle at the top sits the government, one side sits civil society, and the other side sits private sector. And usually 2 have shown up, depending on which country you are. Never has there been a place where all 3 have vibrantly shown up. And I do believe now for us to be able to tackle these megatrends and to address public health, we need to bring all 3 players in. It's not just enough that we expect the government to take care of all this. The issues are bigger than any one sector. and they're usually multifactorial, and so we need a multi-sectorial solution. We need the civil society for sure, but we also need the private sector. The private sector needs to be brought in. Private sector brings innovation, private sector brings innovative financing. We need to bring all those to public health. And unless we have those kind of partnerships that involve private sector, foundations, governments, we are not going to be able to tackle these solutions. So to me, to summarize, the biggest challenge right now is that public health is stagnating in the 19th century. There have been many of our lives that have been positively disrupted, and we are in the 21st century, whether it be banking, music, weather forecasting, GPS, but public health is still being done the same way it was done in the past. We need to modernize public health, and we need to get into the stage of what I'm calling precision public health based on data, partnerships, and most importantly, trust. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Dr. Yodi.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is really wonderful to be here with all of you, and I'm honored to join you all. I'm particularly excited to be on with Dr. Brundtland and Dr. Kariko. No bias to the gentleman, but I'm so honored and pleased to be here with these two giants in the world of women in global health. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Look, I'm going to pick up on a little thing that Naveen just said about the class divide will be access, one of the points, access to data. And I think that's already happening within the course of this current pandemic. Obviously, I've been introduced as being a co-chair of the Africa Union Vaccine Delivery Alliance. I've also recently been appointed special envoy and co-chair of the ACT Accelerator for COVID-19, and so I'm bringing both of those hats to bear. I think within the context of this pandemic, the metric by which the world is measuring severity of illness, and therefore to some extent who needs the medical countermeasures, has been hospitalizations. You know, who has been most impacted, what ICUs are being overrun, what numbers of cases we're seeing. You know, today or last week there were 1.2 million that were tested positive in the United States. ICUs overrun. But the reality is in Africa, and you have just very clearly shown us the disparities in population growth. So that alone tells us that something isn't quite adding up, isn't quite making sense. And the reality is in Africa, nobody has that data because it doesn't exist. So I'm completely in agreement with what the previous speaker just said about data is really going to be that class divide, because it's not the future, it is right now. You know, people say to me all the time when we talk about medical countermeasures, the need to advocate for vaccines, and thank you, Kariko, and those who worked so hard on those. When we talk about that, people often will say, oh, well, but Africa is not affected. How do you know? We are flying blind. You know, the whole of Nigeria, let me speak to Nigeria, which is where I currently sit, has done just over 4 million tests total in the entirety of the pandemic, where the USA has done over 900 million, 4 million tests, the entire country. So we have no data in that regard. We're flying blind on data. There is no health system to speak of. So we can't measure the ICUs. So what I think I would say about the world we want and the world we would hope to have is that the current global health and development architecture, which has largely been designed and controlled by the global north to help and help mold and help develop the global south, is not working. It has not delivered. And, you know, if I can take us to some of the practicality of what you said, you know, you talked about Nigeria going to be one of the biggest countries. Let me go to Lagos, which is, you know, my family are Lagosian. 77 people move into Lagos every hour of every day. 77 people. Every minute. I'm getting that wrong. Every minute of every single day. That is being driven by conflict. It's being driven by unemployment. It's being driven by desperation. Many of those people are also seeking outward migration out of the country. And IOM told us about a year or so ago that over 1,300 people are migrating illegally out of Lagos and its environs every single day in Nigeria. That has impact for the other countries around us. It also, because most migration is internal within Africa, but it also has impact, of course, for Europe and for other parts of the world who are obviously constantly trying to push this back. This global system has not delivered. Despite billions of dollars poured into development projects, the lives of people in these countries have not changed in meaningful or sustainable ways. And in financial times, these investments have yielded incredibly poor results and dismal returns. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed every weakness, every fault line, laid bare the need for radical changes in both global health infrastructure, architecture, multilateral institutions, international aid, and also in national and regional structures. So what we should be discussing here for the world we want is a new world order where the dominant paradigm has to be equitable processes, outcomes, and impact at its heart. We cannot be having these technical conversations all the time from the bottom up. We need to be looking from the top down. We need to be looking from the bottom up at people's lived experience. We need to achieve this vision, we require leadership, strong global leadership. We need women's leadership. So hey, to women in leadership. We need equitable leadership. I say let the world be run by women, but hey, what do I know? And we need this to catalyze systemic shifts generated from the individuals to grassroots to communities to institutions and the general global governance architecture. Later on, I'll speak to geopolitics, which is playing an incredible role in all of what we're seeing at the moment. And the fact that we're not understanding the political economy of the regions and the countries of which we are trying to impact and to achieve change. I'll leave that there for now. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Yodi. Brian Christian, could we hear a few words from you?
Absolutely. First of all, I would like to echo my gratitude for the opportunity to be here in such company. And I'd like to take the next couple minutes to talk in brief about the opportunities and challenges ahead as I see them, specifically in the domain of AI as it pertains to health. So as many people are aware, the field of AI and machine learning has made some truly historic leaps forward, starting about 10 years ago with the rise of so-called deep learning technology, which in a matter of about 12 months had shattered records in everything from language processing to translation to robotics to computer vision. And as this technology continues to develop, it's being used at an accelerating rate in medicine across everything from as Dr. Carroll was saying, supply chain logistics to hospital resource optimization, to clinical diagnosis, to drug discovery. And I believe that the promise of this technology is transformative and dramatic. At the same time, we ought to be concerned about and vigilant against a number of the ways that these sorts of AI systems can go wrong and can cause unintended harms. And I'd like to focus on two, just to mention two in particular. The first, I think, is transparency. So AI systems have a reputation for being sort of black boxes by default, and this can end up causing problems in the real world. So one example, there was a team of dermatologists and computer scientists at Stanford that in several years ago developed an AI system to distinguish between benign and malignant skin lesions. And after some months of working, the system had comparable accuracy to a human expert. So they published their results, heralding the potential of AI to provide care to the many millions of people around the world who have access to a cell phone camera, but don't have access to a dermatologist. Within a span of about a year, this same team of dermatologists and computer scientists published a follow-up note urging people to be incredibly cautious before using systems like theirs. So, okay, what changed in the span of that year? Well, they had done some follow-up analysis on the tool that they had developed, and it turned out that one of the biggest predictors of malignancy, according to their system, was the presence of a ruler on the person's skin, because malignancies typically come with a ruler. You know, if you look in a medical database, for scale. Of course, this is completely useless in practice because patients don't come into your office, you know, with a ruler attached to their skin. So they were able to catch this particular bug in their model only after the fact and only because of specific transparency techniques that they were able to use to visualize which parts of an image ended up being relevant to the model's classification. So I think it's very important that we, going forward, insist on building AI systems that are transparent and interpretable by default, rather than having to go in after the fact and trying to reverse engineer these things. So I think we should insist that almost all real world use of AI, our systems are built with transparency and human oversight in mind so that they are empowering rather than disempowering. So the second point for me is fairness and equity. So this is something that several panelists have mentioned, and I just want to emphasize. So if, for example, a data set happens to contain more images of light-skinned patients, then an AI tool that is built on that data is likely to be more accurate on patients with light skin than on those with dark skin. And this is not simply a hypothetical. 2 months ago, a team at Stanford published an analysis of current state-of-the-art dermatology AI models and apps, showing that they perform 30 to 40% worse on individuals with dark skin. And so I think this touches the points about equity in data. And it's not, in my view, simply access to data, but also representation in the data sets that are used to build this technology. So a final example on this point of fairness and how that intersects with AI, Dr. Ziad Obermeyer from the University of California School of Public Health and his collaborators looked at some of the AI risk prediction tools that prioritize which people should receive care. These tools often use the cost of care as a proxy for health, because it's easy to know, it's hard to know, quote unquote, how sick someone got, but it's easy to know their hospital bill. But this means that people who have less access to care, or who seek out care less frequently, or people who receive less expensive care on average when they do go to the doctor, are treated by the system as inexpensive and therefore lower risk. And similar patients will then receive lower priority care in the future. So automating these sorts of inferences can widen existing disparities across groups. So I think we should take greater care to develop tools that can alleviate rather than perpetuate or exacerbate disparities like this in care received between groups. So I do believe that we're in the middle of a truly disruptive and transformative time with AI in health and in many areas. Bringing this rapidly evolving technology into real world use while preventing unintended harms, I see as one of the defining challenges and opportunities of the decade and frankly, the century ahead.
Brian, thank you. Can we now turn to Dr. Karika?
Good evening. So while Dennis was talking, I was thinking about that 50 years ago when I was in high school, I wrote about what will happen after the 2000. So I was in the 70s there. And many things didn't happen, which we then describe, as saying that it is very hard to predict the future. And listening to you, that I am a biochemist. I am in the laboratory. That's my place. I don't know that what is the problem in Africa, and that locally those people who are living there knows, and I very well understand that imagine here me that what is the problem there is very difficult. So also in a high school I read a book about Shaya wrote about that you have to focus on what you can do. I could do in the laboratory, working on it and doing my best, and I don't want to show up here that I understand the word global problem, but today I visited the Prince Mahidol Museum, and I am still under the influence to see that somebody who could sit in could be a king, and instead somebody decided go to the medical school because want to help the people, go to the United States, come back, and establishing education, bring up to here in Thailand. I am in Thailand. to that level, and helping those who are, because he knew that what is the problem locally here, and when I could see that in 1932 already women were in medical school. I don't think that even the US was here, and they were already the first from the first five. Two of them was selected to professor. So that this person, this prince who could have a privileged life, decided to do that, and knowing the problem what is here, so that what they are doing here in Thailand is, sending the people based on this money what he raised, and then they are coming back, and they know that what is the situation here. They go there, experience, and bring back what is useful, what is not useful, and that's how I can see that something, so that if more people would be here from Africa, and they know that what is the local problem. So what I can do is doing the science, and I have to tell you that the RNA is something what we, not just for the vaccine, but for many other diseases. Actually, the RNA for heart disease and other diseases treatment were much more advanced that, just the vaccine, and the pandemic put the vaccine in the forefront. And why it is important, because the RNA makes many drugs affordable, because it is always made from 4 nucleotides, and the medicine is created in the human body, so that the RNA you inject, and this could be used for everywhere, and it will be right now. Okay, it was difficult, but still, if you would see, I don't know, people like to say the big companies like something, big pharma is bad. Those are very, very good people who were so dedicated. My colleagues at BioNTech, my colleagues at Pfizer, everybody was working day and night, to get the vaccine as soon as possible. The tests were out much faster. I heard that, inequity, because in Africa, the test is not available. I don't know how I can, or what can be done, that it would be next time it would be available. But I remember that going to the United States in 1985, for 2 years, there were no, not even in the United States, there were no tests for testing HIV. So all of the blood supply was infected. So there is progress. We have to recognize that. And I don't know how we could help health better. I can see always what I learned in high school, also in a book. I have to focus on what I can do. So here is the misinformation. I am aware that people are talking, especially they have time to go to the studio, and they are saying very, very stupid things. And those scientists, we are in the laboratory, we are working, and we don't have time to go to the studio to say things that, okay, the world is flat, because everybody can see it's flat. And they are saying things. So I recognize that what I can do is try in the future to use simpler language and educate the public what a molecular biologist is doing, what we are doing, because we haven't done that. Because I like to talk to another colleague and learn what the science, interesting things is doing, and did not learn things. So I just focusing on things I can do, and here in the panel, very good ideas or thought I am hearing, and everybody in their field would think, and then yes, good that at least 3 women is here, and more should be here, and more should be, if the Africa is the major issue, more people from there who knows locally those things, because I don't know what is the problem there. So it has to become from there, and then what those people can do, and I might be able, we are maybe able to help. And so I am just doing what I can do, mostly in biochemistry, but also now in the spotlight in this award ceremony, I try to, advocate women issues and try to help, explain things, what we are scientists is doing, so build trust, so that the people will trust the scientists. There are fake scientists out there, who have time to go to the studio, but we have to do that. And I don't know what I was expected to say here, but as I mentioned today, visiting the Prince Mahidol Museum and realizing that 100 years ago, somebody realized that bringing back to what is useful for the local people, and that it made that today here in Thailand, the medicine is so advanced in a world level. And because one person 100 years ago thought that, learning, bring it back, knowing the local condition and implementing what is useful, and whatever is useful somewhere else, but not here, just leave it out. And so, and I know also that for the medicine is, the health, global health is much cheaper if, we exercise, don't eat that much, and, for the advanced world, because prevention is much cheaper than treatment. But, we are, as I mentioned, the RNA, what we contributed with my colleague, and making it non-inflammatory and can be used for many, many things. Genetic disease, disease in Africa, that sickle cell anemia treatment is HIV is present, for example, is in the forefront to targeting the messenger RNA to treat those kind of disease, which is, sub-Saharan Africa is a real problem. Without, blood transfusion and other, just delivering the RNA and targeting that. So we are working on it, and what we can do is in the laboratory with collaboration, global, and also it is very important, this international collaboration that what we are doing. And in this way also, as a scientist, we work together, we understand better those colleagues who are coming from different parts of the world, and understanding their culture and learning from each other, and they can help locally those who living in other part of the world. So, I am not. I didn't know what you expect from me to be on the panel, but these are my thoughts today. As I mentioned when I was listening to Dennis talking, that 50 years ago I studied and spent a whole week in a library reading about Malthusianism, what we will have. They saw that in 2000 we will not have enough food, clear water, and many other things, which some happened and some did not. But if we kind of predict and try to do something today, would be to prevent disaster, would be good.
Dr. Karim, thank you. No, this was very helpful. Thank you very much for your intervention. And I'm delighted to hear that you were able to go to the Prince Mahidol Museum. Very inspirational. Dr. Mohammed, could you offer your thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much. So, from my perspective and from what I'm seeing, especially that I come also from a low middle income country like Egypt. So, the issues that we're facing and preventing us from achieving the world we want, I would say, firstly, I would echo what Dr. Rao said regarding the health equity. This is, I would say, terrible when it comes to segregation based on socioeconomic status, based on where you're living, based on what your income is, based on several different factors. Although, this would even show us that our agendas, when we get to the whole world, what does the world want to achieve, our agendas are not aligned together. So, for example, if I'm asking or if I'm saying that health is a basic human right, But on the other hand, many people are suffering from poverty, many people are uneducated, many people are not attaining their health or attaining like a quality life. So like, how are we speaking about health as a basic human right, but at the same time, we're unable to tackle or address the social determinants of health? So that's the first thing. And when it comes to the pandemic, or when it comes to the current situation that we're living in at the moment, there is a very apparent lack of preparedness towards the future. We speak about the current situation, we speak about what we want to achieve, but we do much less than we're speaking about. And this is like something that is not just the role of governments, but role of government, civil society, private sector, everyone. The reason like the whole world has like suffered from different pandemics, different conflict, different health and humanitarian emergencies. We could have been prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic, but we were not. And actually, like, I'm a bit hesitant or skeptical about how much we will be prepared even for future emergencies, because they will happen. But like how much we're prepared, that's the issue. And the thing is, we keep on speaking about building back better. And however, it's just about building forward, because we have been doing a lot of things in the wrong way. But we're just not learning about how we should do these things. And one of the things, or one of the issues that we're facing is like the engagement and the involvement of all relevant stakeholders. So for example, when it comes to myself as a young individual, or talking about civil society, or talking about private sector, it depends on, like, for example, some countries, which sectors they want to involve, which sector they don't want to involve, which target group they want to involve and which not. And as also some of us mentioned, that inclusion, for example, of people with lived experience, this is something that is not getting done. This is something that's not happening. So the thing is, if we're getting to tackle the issues that we're facing, we need to include everyone, we need to engage everyone, and at the same time, ensure their empowerment. And that brings us to another issue, which is health literacy. I believe health literacy is a very, very big issue in our communities. And just the basic health literacy, like many people, I would say, they are not even aware of what health should entail, what should they do in order to protect their health, what they should do in order to prevent their diseases, even what they should do in order to get treated. So many people don't know about like health as a concept, don't know about the basic needs, don't know about even the rights when it comes to health. They know nothing about this. So if we're asking, or if we're looking forward to a community which is healthy, if I would call it this way, this community needs to be able to ask for their own rights and fight for them and advocate for their own right of health. However, if these communities are not aware even of this right, how will they lobby or how will they advocate for it? So that's the issue. We're lacking health literacy. We're lacking literacy in general when it comes to several different areas. So for example, there are so many crises that are happening. But for example, if I just go and meet someone who is very, very poor, who is uneducated, I won't be able to explain these crises, because he's just facing the big issue of like how much he will gain for this day, or how much he will eat, or how much will he bring for his family for this day. So if we're asking people, okay, let's tackle the crises, let's tackle the issues that we're having in the world, we need to get them prepared for this. So another thing, or like what should we do in order to tackle this, is the health in all policies approach. This is something, an approach that like the health community, I would say, and everyone have been advocating for, but much less things have been done in order to implement this. However, we need to involve this. For example, last November, I attended the United Nations Climate Change COP26, and people were there talking about climate change, and we're talking and advocating for health. But the thing is, health was not there in all policies. Health was not there when we come to speak about, for example, the inclusion of gender and gender empowerment when we get to tackle climate change. Health was not there when we were talking about the fossil fuels industry. Health was not there when we were talking about financing. So how will we deal with the other policies if we don't understand them, if we don't include health in all these policies? And by this, I don't just mean that other sectors should know about health, but it's also our responsibility to know about other sectors and how we should engage with them. So that's important. And we should, like, several meetings I have attended, there have been many countries and many member states and many governments speaking about solidarity and unity, but doing the exact opposite. And we need to stop this. We need to stop just speaking about solidarity, speaking about unity, speaking about collaboration, and doing the opposite. for example, the vaccine issues. Countries speaking about the COVAX and countries speaking about we should help each other and we should stand in solidarity. However, some countries are providing booster doses for all the population, not just for the people in need, while other countries, more than 50% of the population didn't even receive their first dose. Then what solidarity are we talking about if we're not acting upon it? So this segregation in terms of the communities and this segregation based on the country's economic status or like people, whether they come from a certain continent and other people coming from others, we're just one world. And like the mega trends that Dr. Carol mentioned at the beginning, they will affect everyone, maybe in different degrees, but they will still affect everyone. So if we don't do things together, if we don't do as much as we speak, then I guess like we will do much better if we just act instead of just saying like the strong and the powerful words by the governments and by other stakeholders. So yeah, thank you so much.
Dr. Mohammed, thank you. We've finished the first part of the panel interventions. I'd like to pose a question, and Dr. Brundtland, maybe specifically to you, but for others as well. The issues that have come up across many of the interventions over the last few minutes have really spoken to a fundamental question. Is the global health architecture really consistent with being able to achieve the kind of actionables that Dr. Mohammed was just talking about, that does allow for equitable, not just sharing of products, but data, information, empowerment? Do we have to rethink what that global architecture will need to look like? And if so, what are some of the key issues you think that architecture needs to address, particularly within the geopolitical dynamics that we exist in? Over to you, Dr. Brundtland.
Yes, thank you. You know, I think the geopolitical reality is illustrated through the examples that Mohammed has just illustrated and others in their speaking to us. And the issue is, you know, the global health architecture, you could make an ideal system better than the one we have, which would, you know, try to address some of the issues that have been illustrated today about inequity. Also, what Mohammed said is important. I think we need to know about other sectors. Yeah, you know, he said health has to enter into the broader discussion, whether it's climate or other parts of the bigger agenda. But he has observed something important, that unless health people look into the cross-sectoral issues of the world, which are fundamental, you know, as social determinants of health, we all know that, then we will not be able to get a unified approach and convince more people what needs to be done. So the issue is this. I see the status we have in geopolitical terms as less optimistic today in 2022 than, in fact, what it looked like two decades ago. Because there was more general understanding among leaders about multilateralism, about the importance of all the issues that led into the Paris Agreement and led into the Sustainable Development Goals. There was more willingness among political leaders, also the stronger ones, to really address global issues because we are in this together. What we have seen in the last 5 or 10 years is less attention to global issues and more attention to local, national politics and competition between countries instead of working together. Now, let me, from that more pessimistic analysis, say that because health is in many ways a unifying issue, that people now more understand that we are so dependent across borders, it's a good idea to use health as an illustration of how humanity is dependent to be working across borders and to see to it that poverty, gender imbalances, all the issues that influence health are dramatic, looking at it from any country or from any local community. So we should insist from our leaders at local, regional, and national and global level that they do work together across the borders and that they take the data seriously. But what we have seen is that even in the last meeting in Glasgow on climate, we had a situation where the global community did not do what it needed to do to make the future safer for everyone, but they did some things. It's a kind of a mixed bag. And when you look at what's happening about global preparedness for new diseases and pandemics like this one, the follow-up to the panels that have given the ideas to the World Health Assembly and to the public and to the general governance, they have not been pursued. They have been pushed ahead. So we don't have at present the right global leadership to be able to even reassess and improve the global health architecture. Sorry to say what I really see about this, but data and having civil society work on hard and looking across all the sectors that are involved in people's lives is the only way forward.
Dr. Brundtland, thank you. Dr. Udy, I'd like to ask you that same question, but particularly with respect to your point about needing to develop a more dynamic bottom-up rather than top-down. The global health architecture, how could it contribute to a more dynamic bottom-up approach?
Thank you, Dennis. I want to react a little bit to also what Dr. Brundtland said, and also what Mohammed said as I answer that question, that I think that we're working a lot in silos, all of us around the world. And I often say that COVID and climate are two sides of the same coin. Both have shown us that there is lack of political will, lack of global leadership, and that there is more rhetoric than there actually is true action. And both also show us that if we don't do what is necessary, I mean, with climate, you have the countries that are basically creating 3% or thereabouts, I don't have the exact figures, of the emissions are the ones who are suffering really the most from the financial repercussions. And we're working in silos. We're working in silos because we're not working with those. I loved what Dr. Kariko said earlier about, she doesn't know what's going on in Africa because, it is only the person who's wearing the shoe who knows where it is pinching them. That is an African proverb, I mean, I can say it in Yoruba, it is only the person who is wearing it who knows what the problem is. And we're not including enough of those voices in the conversation. So we've also, health is the true definition of health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. And I think maybe we need to start rehearsing that at the beginning of every meeting and knowing that, therefore, you cannot have a climate conference without having a concomitant health conference along the same time, because climate and health are very, very closely related. We have to stop working in silos. Even as we talk about the GPMB, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board that Dr. Brundtland used to co-chair with my dear big brother, Asi, again, I would posit that needs to include climate, because it's pandemics, but climate and its threats, it's all inclusive. And why it needs to be bottom up is this. There's a lot of talk around decolonizing aid, global health. I mean, some of that language tends to be divisive. And I think what we need to do at this moment in history, this really critical moment is in history, as Dr. Brundtland has also said, is that we need to bring down the rhetoric. We need to stop the divisions. We need to start, stop the pushing against each other. We need to more begin to come together, come together. Let us understand that, yes, things have gone wrong in the past. I mean, in this my new role with my new hat as co-chair of the ACT Accelerator, there are people from within, the more activist community who would say to me, oh, why would you do that? Why would you go and join them? It is not a them and us situation. If we don't speak together, if we don't try and form a common language, again, Dr. Karika spoke about wanting to sort of demystify, is my understanding, some of the language and the conversations around vaccine production and mRNA, and bring it down to the level where people can understand. That is where we need to go. And that is what I mean by bottom up. We need to have, what we really need to seek to do, to my mind, is turn the global architecture and funding structures also on their heads, because money is power. And at the end of the day, it is, like Mohammed was saying, there are all of these promises being made. I mean, and a lack of understanding of what it means to not fulfill the promises to fund the ACT Accelerator, of which the vaccine pillar is COVAX. And that if we don't do that, now we have Omicron, but in another 9 months, will we have Omega Plus or its grandchildren? We need to come together, and it is only those with the lived experience. It is only those who are the beneficiaries. It is only those who are in governance in some of those parts of the world. And I have also spoken very strongly about this in the past, that, we can't also just call civil society and have civil society bear the brunt or bear the responsibility for bringing people's voices to the fore. Why are we different? Why is it that we have one civil society representative who speaks for 1 minute at a meeting? Surely civil society should be a part, or whatever we're calling civil society. Civil society is all of us. And I don't understand why we have those differences. So for me, that working from the bottom up means gaining the information from the communities and from the countries, from Africa. I mean, your presentation was almost solely about Africa. And, Lagos population, let me go back to Lagos, is going to be greater than 15 African countries combined. I would dare say that many of us who are here talking about the world that we want, the world of the future, should be going to Lagos and going to see exactly what that looks like. I can tell you what it looks like. It looks like slums that you just cannot believe and imagine, next to an ocean that is surging and is encroaching and taking back its land in places where it's been reclaimed, houses that are underwater for 3 to 4 months of the year during the rainy season, and the diseases that come with that from a health perspective. It is malaria on steroids. It is watery diarrhea. These things have become such a natural part of people's lives because planning is everything. And these cities were not planned with that in mind. These cities were not planned because the drivers of some of the entry of masses of people are conflict and the Lake Chad and Northeast Nigeria crisis. The majority of those riding tuk-tuks, the equivalent of tuk-tuks, and I also wish I were in Thailand today, riding the equivalent of tuk-tuks in Lagos, in their hundreds of thousands, are mainly from Northeast Nigeria, from Borno State. We have to understand that from the bottom up. And we can give all this data, but unless you are there, unless you are understanding from those communities, unless you're understanding in Borno, unless you're understanding in Kampala what the drivers are and what is causing the joblessness that is driving people, what is causing people to have 9 children, 10 children. I have 1 daughter, I have 2 children, a daughter and a dog. And, that is, my hands are full. 10 children, how do you feed them? But you need to speak to the people. You cannot make those decisions from Geneva. You cannot make those decisions from Washington, D.C. Or other places. But too much, the decision-making is coming from those who do not have the lived experience. For me now, within the ACT Accelerator, I'm learning. My role is to help them understand, because we also have the fact that filtering up of information, someone like Naveen as a senior vice president in the Rockefeller Foundation, you'll often find that those who are your staffers and your aides and your researchers often are filtering information so that by the time it gets to you, you have lost the true essence of what that information is, unless you are working with those who are at the bottom up. If we don't do that, we're not going to achieve any change. I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you, Yodi. A question came in that basically pointed out that if data and information are so central to being able to create a healthier environment. The conundrum that was being pointed out in this question is, why is it that the countries that have the greatest access to data and information are the countries, in fact, that have been most severely impacted by this particular pandemic? Why is it that data and information hasn't been able to be used to really maximize the impact that it could have? Why is it that those countries, the United States, for instance, a data-rich, information-rich society, is so impacted by this particular pandemic? Brian, your thoughts, and then maybe Dr. Rao.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges right now from an artificial intelligence perspective is how to combat misinformation. And so, you know, the analogy that occurs to me in sort of thinking about the information landscape in the United States is that we're information rich in the same way we are sort of food rich, in that, you know, there's plenty of it, but you know, the actual nutritional value is the dubious thing, as opposed to the actual like number of calories. So I think you know, we're rich in information and disinformation, and you know, this is one of the ongoing battles in the world of machine learning. Is, can you detect, you know, in an automated way, accounts that are sort of acting in bad faith? And so I think that is one of the fundamental challenges that's playing out right now at social media companies. And I think one of the ways in which the landscape has really transformed is that we have so few, comparatively few companies that are really the gatekeepers and moderators of our entire public discourse. So I think that is one of the trends that has really changed dramatically. One other thing that I'll point out on the subject of data and what can't be done with data, particularly in information-rich societies, is AI systems typically require an explicit, what's called objective function, which is an explicit numerical way to define the objective that you want the system to have. And so in a health context, we have seen, going back to the 1980s, one of the first real breakthrough technologies in terms of using AI in medicine was adaptive clinical trials for things like ECMO. And ECMO fits this property of having a very clear-cut objective. You know, if someone goes into a kind of a pulmonary arrest, they will either live or die within a very short amount of time. And that gives you a very concrete data point that you can use to do this adaptive trial. As Dr. Yodi pointed out, health is more than simply the absence of disease. And I think it's an ongoing challenge to think about, even in a wealth of data, how do you actually define and operationalize the objectives that you want from a more positive standpoint, right? Not merely did this person live or die within, you know, X number of minutes, but how do we want to define public health from a positive standpoint? How do we want to think about what makes good end of life care? It's not easy to translate that into a single numerical metric, which is what the sort of AI architecture is built to optimize. And so I think that is going to be one of the other major challenges going forward, is that we have these systems that can readily optimize given some numerical value, but we can't always distill what we want into that numerical value. So I think that is one of the other fundamental challenges, even in a world awash with data. I think translating that into an operational definition of success remains one of the key issues.
Great, Brian, thank you. We're coming up on the final few minutes. So what I'd like to do is to ask each of you to sort of offer sort of a 1 minute sort of intervention that summarizes for you what you think the key take-home message you would like to leave with this audience. And I'd like to maybe start with you, Dr. Rao.
Yeah, so let me first answer the question, and it's very, it's not a conundrum, it's not in conflict. Basically, if you look at America from a 60,000 foot view, it is data rich, and you wonder why there's so many deaths there. But if you zoom in and look at who is dying in that country, in USA, who are the ones who are dying? They're the ones that don't have access to information, that are the minorities, that are in the slums, that are the older, that are the illegal immigrants. So if you really look, even in a country that is data rich, the ones that are dying are the ones that don't have access to data. So it is really not in contradiction to that comment that access to data is important. So if you look at America writ large, it doesn't make sense. But if you dig down deeper, you realize the ones who are dying are indeed the ones who resemble the ones in the rest of the world. So with that, I want to go back that to get public health into the 21st century, we need data, we need trust, and we need partnership. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Mohammed.
So what I would end with is like mainly two things. The first thing is, like, we have mentioned data a lot during this panel. And the thing is that what we should do is two things from my own perspective. The first thing is that we should give an equal focus between countries, between populations. We should focus on giving them the data, giving them the capacity, giving them the empowerment initiatives, giving them everything that they need in order to ensure a quality and a healthy life. And this is very important because, like, the data that we have now in many different public health issues, yes, it's global data, but it's so much of, like, let's say, high income countries and certain populations, and it's just like referred to as global data at the end. However, it does not meet the needs of all the populations and all the communities. So first, when we get to speak about data, let's give equal focus to all countries, to all populations, to everyone. And the other thing is giving equitable balance when it comes to focusing on the different public health issues. For example, when industrialization happened, the shift went from communicable diseases more to NCDs, and that NCDs are the leading cause of death. However, now came a pandemic with a communicable disease that literally stopped the world. So this means that we shouldn't just give focus just for one or two public health issues, and these are the main issues and these are the main crises, and that's it. But we need to give equitable focus to different public health issues, to different global health issues, in order to avoid future emergencies, not just health, but just even, and not just on the population level, but even emergencies on the individual level for everyone that they may meet in their everyday life. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Karenka.
Yeah. I am just said that what I can do, I can educate people, talking about what we are doing. I am here and here again with colleagues, reaching out for the area. We just came from Vietnam. We were there for 1 week. Now we are here in Thailand, and my colleagues, building bridges, collaboration, helping people. That's what I can do. And going back with colleagues to work more on the issue. I understand, that we can talk about the ideal world, and I don't know that how to do that part, but what I can do, I will do, and encourage others. And I can say also in University of Pennsylvania, we have a global medicine where people from all over the world are coming, getting medical degree at Penn, and then they are going back, and then the connection again existing and alive, and so everybody has to look at what they can do. And so I can tell you a lot of what would be optimal and what would be great, but I don't know how to get that. So you guys smarter, and you figure out that.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Yodi.
That's great. I don't know about smarter, Dr. Kariko. You must be one of the smartest people that I know. But for me, I would say that it is really simple. From your presentation, Dennis, you showed us that Africa is the future. It's a future of possibilities. It's also a future of challenges, but there is a huge opportunity in that. But for the whole world we want, which is where we started with this, for the world we want going forward, we need to embrace the disruption to come, and we need to welcome transformative leadership. I know that Dr. Brundtland has spoken about the geopolitics and the the leadership of this. But we need to ensure that a life in Mumbai means the same as a life in is worth the same as a life in Brussels, that a life in Lagos is worth the same as a life in London, that a life in New Delhi is worth the same as a life in New York, that a life in Sao Paulo is worth the same as a life in I don't know, Washington, DC, or wherever else, or Paris or Switzerland. This is the world we want. That is where that is what we're leaning into. But to do that, we need inclusion. To do that, we need the voices of the global South to be at the table, not just in a tokenistic manner. To do that, we need women. We need intersectional leadership. We need to have everybody. We can't just have half the sky. We need to have the whole sky. We need to have the whole world together as one at the table. That is the world we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yodi. Brian.
Yeah, I think in my opening remarks, I highlighted what I see as two of the key issues for AI in health, which are fairness in representation in data sets in particular, and transparency in understanding how these tools work so that we can use them in an empowered way. And I think from my perspective, that's a useful analogy for thinking about global infrastructure and the human infrastructure of health more generally, that those ought to be some of the same guiding principles. Fairness and equity in terms of, as we've said, who has a seat at the table, who's represented both in the data and in the actual decision-making, and transparency. Are the systems that we're building, understandable? Are they accountable? And so I think in many ways, AI gives us both one of the key pieces of this global project, and it also serves as a kind of microcosm. Some of the same principles apply both within AI and to global health infrastructure more broadly.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Brundtland, a final word from you.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I should address the issue of the word we use when we say public health, and even public health, architecture, etc. But we should be reminded that the world is still not come to the critical point where the understanding of public health is fully there, while national politicians and local politicians talk about health as the direct access from patients who are sick to treatment, and the whole issue of working on illness to bring people back to health. The whole prevention side and the whole social determinants of health issue, the public health arena, is not fully taken seriously by sufficient numbers of leaders. They are focusing on hospital development in their own countries, and focusing on how much of their GDP or their national economy is used in health to treat illness. The global health security issue in a broader sense, and the fact that we are all interrelated and need prevention and action that need to be funded. We need a strong WHO, because otherwise, how can we have a follow-up and a global preparedness before the next pandemic even without that? And so we are lacking the common good understanding, and that means that we need a popular, greater understanding where everyone needs to be participating in the way that most of the panelists here have been talking. But the reality of the present situation is not sufficient funding, not sufficient awareness that multilateralism, including public global health security, is the issue that we need to address for going forward.
Thank you very much. And let me just offer one final word, and it's really picking up, I think, on a point that Dr. Yodi made, that if we're really talking about being able to achieve an equitable, fair, healthy world. And the first step in that equation is making sure that a life in New Delhi is as valuable as a life in New York, that a life anywhere is equally valuable to a life anywhere else. And I think that we do not bring that sense of shared value, and we do have an inequitable sense of what a life is worth in one part of the world versus what it's worth in another part. And to achieve, I think, equity, we need to rethink how we value life itself. The second point that I'd like to offer is, I think we also heard from Dr. Brundtland and others that our sense of public health is too narrow, that we need to understand public health within the larger context of the world we live in. We can't separate our own health from the ecology around us, from the systems around us that are transcendent to any individual sector. In some way, we need to rethink about the chapeau under which public health exists, that it's inherently broader, more comprehensive, more multi-sectoral. And we need to take steps to build a understanding within the public health community that we need a broader vision, a shared vision that's much more inclusive of the kind of world we live in, which is inherently multi-sectoral. So with that, I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to our panelists. All of you, thank you for making your time available. And most importantly, thank you for your interventions and your thoughtfulness. To everyone, thank you very much. We appreciate your participation. And to the Prince Mayadal Awards Conference Secretariat, again, thank you for the excellence of your organization and commitment to this conference itself. I will close at that point. Thank you very much.